to Reptile Fight Club. With you, as always, is my co-host, Jeff Holman.
Hello.
And myself, Justin Jr. We are going to fight today. So, excited about our little brawl here. But I don't know what you got going. You got anything?
So, in the snake room, I finished installing. So I think last episode I was talking about how I put in some heat panels, or I actually bought some heat panels and I got them all off gassed, and I finally got them installed, and I had to move around my UV light in the cage. And so now everything's all set up, and I'm pretty much ready to rock and roll with my Tracy I group this year.
Cool.
So that's good. I'm glad to have that finally settled. And
what did you do for caging for those guys?
So I built plywood caging for them.
Nice.
And similar dimensions than the old caging. It's just longer. The cages I put them in and bred them in are 36 by 24 by 24, and these are 5 feet by 24 by 24. So
cool.
they're just longer. They have the exact same elevated perch attached. So it's a nesting box and a perch. There's a basking shelf that kind of leads right into the nesting box. The nesting box is elevated and it has a pass through, so they can actually be separated in that nesting box. They really like the nesting box.
Yeah.
And
is that like elevator hung from the top of the?
Yeah. So it's basically screwed right to the side of the cage, and it's right off the right hand side. So I have a whole separate, like the top of the nesting box comes off, so I can just access the nesting box separate from the cage.
Oh, nice. Yeah. That's a cool design. Yeah.
And then,
cool.
I cut so I've been keeping one of the males and then the other female. The two I'm going to breed this year for sure. In separate cages, and I cut the pass through for that. So now I can kind of open that up as at will. But still feeding, still trying to get them ready. So not really ready to let them commingle or anything.
Yeah. What did you seal the cages with?
I used like a silicone, just a silicone sealant, and then I painted the inside. So yeah,
nice. Yeah, that's fun. I've been working on some cages lately as well, and tried to do some fake rock work in there and stuff, make them look like the desert. I'm not totally happy with my first go around, so I think I've got like 3 sets of the same kind of cage. I found all these shelving units for like really cheap, and so I bought like a bunch of shelving units and just made cages out of them. And just mounted some lights and stuff inside, and put in some elevated hide boxes and things like that. So for some of the Antaresia, and they're working pretty well. I probably need to put some vents in them, so I'm looking to 3D print some vents and do
nice.
That. But so it's been fun. But I enjoy building cages. I had to build some racks. I was running out of room for babies, and I had some plastic sitting around because I'd ordered a bunch and hadn't gotten around to assembling all the racks. And so I threw a couple racks together and got some for those ball python babies I got. So yeah, I
feel bad.
I
have one Tracy I, that one male that is in the old cage, and I built the other 2 cages. They're plywood, and before the price of timber just went berserko. Yeah. So now I'm like, man, it'd be cheaper to build it out of plastic. So it's crazy. Yeah, it is, like the price of wood and material, and it's just nuts, dude. It's like it's over doubled. I mean, it's almost tripled in price.
Oh, so I mean, that OSB plywood, it was like what, $10 a sheet, and now it's like 30-40 a sheet. I'm like, really, are you kidding me?
I saw $100 sheet of like pine, like plywood. So I was like, what the
I
heck,
pity
dude?
anybody that's trying to build a house right now. That would be
Oh, it's be
crazy.
crazy.
And
Just
like people like the contractors, they made bids and then they
yeah.
start the work and all of a sudden their costs triple. It's like, yeah, that's unsustainable. They have to revise
Well,
that.
and I think a lot of those guys lock in if
Yeah,
they're
that's
large
true.
developers, they kind of lock in their price on materials and stuff
Hmm.
like that. So, but I mean, when the prices fluctuate like that, and then you're looking to do a big build or something like that. I mean, how do you mitigate those prices that aren't locked
Yeah.
in? They're
Yeah.
they're prohibitive. So
I do enjoy, using the plastic, but at the same time, it's hard to beat, the structural qualities of wood
hmm
and,
oh,
plywood.
for
And,
sure,
so, it's, I guess, to each his own, or,
yeah.
I got some, those plastic cages from you and they're working out
Yeah.
really well.
They're good. Those are good
Yeah.
cages.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
were animal
Definitely
plastic
decent.
cages that you could get in 6 weeks rather than
Yeah.
6 years. So
Yeah.
I would have
Exactly.
liked to have. I would have liked to have. Gotten some AP cages or a good PVC cage, but it's
Yeah.
just I don't know.
Just
It's
can't
just
get them.
it's
Takes
just it was
forever.
just yeah. It was just easier for me to use the old kind of cage design and keep things as
Mhm.
functionally the same as they were in the old cage, and just build a plywood cage that's to my kind
Yeah.
of to my liking.
Your
So
specifications. If
yeah,
if you're handy at all, that's the way to go because then you
yeah,
can build it how you want it. Yeah.
yeah,
That's cool.
yeah, yeah,
Cool.
and I like to do that stuff on the weekends. So
Yeah.
it's good. It's good.
Yeah.
So
I don't know. I mean, just normal stuff's going on with my reptile collection, trying to get babies to feed. This is the time of year for that, and having fun with the Egernia. They're such
nice.
cool lizards. And yeah, normal stuff going on.
I know
Yeah.
I've been seeing a Gurnia around on Facebook, and I'm just like, no,
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah. This is the
They
year when they're born, usually
yeah,
in the middle of the summer, and yeah, you
yep.
see them for sale and stuff.
They definitely look
They're
fun, and
very cool animals,
yeah,
but yeah, they're
I
low
need more
pricing.
animals. Like I need a hole in my head right now.
Yeah,
So
that's the
yeah,
hard thing is there's so many cool reptiles to keep, but
yeah,
yeah, we have to limit yourself,
yeah.
or you wind up with more than you can handle. I have been at that point many a times in my career.
I was at that point as well, and I
Yeah.
mean I slimmed down my collection, and
Hmm.
then I got into day geckos, and then I'm like, oh, these things are awesome, and I'm
Yeah.
like, oh man, you can keep small pine Antaresia are awesome, like
Yeah.
you go down that whole other rabbit
Oh
hole, and
yeah.
then you're like, wait, I'm gonna end up in the same but different place here if I keep
Yeah.
going. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely I mean, I guess it'd be nice if I had all the space in the world, but living in California,
Oh yeah.
you
You're
you
very limited out
yeah.
there.
So I
Yeah.
wish I could. I wish I could do something like Ryan Young and have
Yeah.
that whole reptile edition that's
Yeah.
off his house, and
Mhm.
that looks amazing. So I'm
Yeah,
sure
it's pretty sweet. He's
he's
very
loving
handy.
life.
Yeah, he
Oh
does
yeah,
a
he
lot of
is.
cool projects and builds his own cages and had some
Yeah,
cool ideas for cages too. That I kind of stole off him. Looking his cage
yeah,
designs for especially for the Antaresia and stuff. Some cool stuff.
yeah.
Um, yeah. How's your outdoor stuff doing? You keeping anything outside right now, or is
Good.
it too
Yeah.
hot?
No, it's all right. I've
Mhm.
got my paracoastals outside.
That's so
They're doing
cool.
fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're doing fine. I'm kind of like want to see how they do in the next year or so. Like I want to see 2 years outside, and then I'll probably move
Yeah.
my diamonds outside, and
Hmm.
probably get at least probably move most of my carpets outside. I've got
Hmm.
my Darwins, I've got albino Darwins, I've got some diamonds, and then I've got those coastals, and I'll
Yeah.
probably if all things go well and I like it, and I mean it. So good so far,
That's cool.
seems pretty locked on, pretty easy.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um,
Seems like maybe the Darwins might get a little too cold during the winter, but the
yeah,
others could handle it just fine, I'm
yeah,
sure.
for sure.
Especially the diamonds. It
Yeah.
doesn't get too cold
Well,
in
I
Southern
mean,
California for diamonds.
it
Yeah.
was, I mean, it was probably, I don't know, man, maybe 50s. And those
Hmm.
coastals were just out cruising around
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
they didn't go in from basking. They just sat out there. So, I mean, I just think that, you gotta kind of, obviously if you live in a Mediterranean climate, man, you should try it. You definitely,
that's cool.
You learn a few things and you see how good it can be.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Yeah, I'm jealous of like Scott Eiper keeping all the his imbricata and stuff outside. That's pretty cool.
Definitely.
Yeah, good stuff. Cool, man. Anything else? We can mention the Southwest Carpet Fest, or sorry,
Northwest,
not Southwest, Northwest Carpet Fest. Jeff and Kendra of Puget Sound Pythons are putting it on up in Bothell, Washington.
That's right,
September 18th. So
that's right,
another month or so before that happens. But yeah, that should be cool.
4 days after my 45th birthday, man.
Whoa, you're an old man.
I know. I am an old man. That's a very true statement. I feel like an old man sometimes.
Still got you by a year and a half, I guess.
But, yeah, well, you can have it. You can keep it. Keep the prize.
Yeah. I'll take it. I'm enjoying being old.
That's good.
It's got its advantages, I guess. So I was talking to Nick Bottini. I might be saying that wrong. I apologize, Nick. I didn't ask you how you pronounce your last name, but anyway, we were talking about the kind of reptile legislation and stuff, and a little bit because he's in South Carolina where all those cobras are idiots are letting their cobras loose for some reason, and so that's kind of crazy. If you're in South Carolina or around that area, join the fight because they're taking away a lot of the reptile keepers privileges out there.
What happened to Nick? What was his?
He bought some like Gila monsters and beaded lizards and thought, I should be okay with these. They have pretty good venomous laws out in the state, and like a year later they outlawed him, so he had to sell that whole project a year after he got
and that was related to that that was related to that cobra that got loose.
No, I don't think so, because that just happened recently, so I don't think they've enacted the laws that quickly, and it sounds like it was fairly recently you had to get rid of him, so it could be, I don't know the details on that, but thank goodness for USR
changing
and
climate,
things like that. I mean that's and it's
and there's another cobra loose in Texas, I think.
Oh yeah, like a forest cobra or something.
Yeah. I think that's right. I seen what
a mess.
Yeah, I seen Jeff Behringer posted about it, and I think he's down in Texas, and I'm pretty sure that was where it happened. Not 100% on that, but yeah, man. Lock your cobras up, people. Jesus.
Yeah. Come on, people.
Yeah.
And it only takes like one thing to kind of make everything go.
Well, it's really interesting. I just feel like, and it feels like it moves in cycles and waves, and it just seems like there's a lot of, I was on the way home today, there's a lot of attention that seems to be on reptiles and exotics right now. And I don't know if that's a concerted push from animal rights people, or what, whether just the recent instance of certain instances that have happened that have drawn attention to it, or what. But, I was like listening to NPR on the way home, and they were talking about, all of the large exotic animals, and they were talking about big cats and wolves and bears and larger mammals, and they were just kind of talking about like what happens. Like there's a sanctuary in San Diego, and they went out to this sanctuary and kind of going through like why this sanctuary is good, that these animals aren't bred, aren't sold for money. They're there to live out their life, and just kind of talking about it. But it just kind of in my head was just like, man, this is really, seems to be a sharpening of the spear, so to speak, with exotic animals and a push towards, very not the outline, but just kind of the changing the discussion around the appropriateness of exotic animals, and maybe some of that's totally fair. I'm not sure big cats belong readily available for people to own. And
I mean, there's definitely that's the hardest thing too, because if you just flat out ban them, that makes it easy, because then nobody has to enforce it. And if somebody has one, then it's easy to say, oh, that's illegal, but sometimes there's just no sense behind it. I believe that we as Americans have a right to keep things if we're responsible and we can do it properly. And maybe for big cats that means you have to have some kind of sanctuary, or you have to have some kind of zoo, or whatever. But I don't know. I mean, we saw how that worked out for Tiger King. They're feeding them expired meat from Walmart or something. I just don't think that's the way to do things. But
one of the things they were talking about is this this sanctuary's got it's like a sanctuary accreditation. So there is some sort of accreditation associated with it. And so it's you have to kind of hit some check boxes. Whereas I don't think I would necessarily call the Tiger King's facility a sanctuary, or that was a breeding facility and a size shows too.
I have heard people kind of come to his defense a little bit within the reptile community that have met him and kind of know him. So, I'm not going to say I know all the details. I mean, I watched the show, the Tiger King, but that doesn't necessarily, they may have portrayed him in a different light, or, that kind of thing. So, I mean, he might be just passionate about tigers. And I think there does need to be like a captive bred source. We can't go out collecting tigers from the wild. They need to be protected in the wild. So, tigers for zoos, or tigers for these different, smaller wildlife parks or whatever. And they need to come from somewhere. So somebody needs to breed tigers.
But I guess my question is like, okay, so you're a tiger breeder, so you breed tigers. Like what is the outside of maybe zoos, maybe attractions, things like that. Where is your market for, large cats?
I think that's
and selling to the public that's risky. You know what I mean? If your cat kills one of the kids, or
it's the same thing with venomous reptiles. I mean, I was talking to Terry Phillip, went and visited him up in South Dakota, and he was saying that they're having a hard time sourcing, getting a place to buy venomous reptiles from, because, nobody wants the liability, that nobody's breeding them, because, then you have to sell them to private hobbyists or whatever, and all the laws that are enacted. It's really difficult to find anything, and this is from, kind of a private zoological institution. So that's a tricky balance, to say we want, there to be a source of these things, but we also appreciate that they need to be protected in their house. It's just a complicated thing. And to say this is what needs to be done, that's very difficult to do, because it's so complex. And I guess that's what we do here, right? We talk about the complexities of issues. And so, even the Tiger King probably has a place, but defining that place is very difficult, and saying, okay, you're abusing your position or whatever. And I do think there were places that were monitoring things that were going on, and that kind of stuff. So there is some oversight and with these kind of places. And I think didn't they shut down that weird doctor dude that had all the lady friends,
Dr. Antle?
Exactly. I think they shut his place down. Maybe I heard that wrong, but anyway,
I think that's right. They took his animals from him, I believe.
Yeah. So I mean, I think there needs to be places that breed, venomous reptiles, and maybe that's, for zoological institutions to do, or maybe there's some private keepers that can do that responsibly and source, or provide animals for zoos and wildlife parks or whatever.
Well, do you think that the private hobby, you know, the average person who's like, well, it's not illegal in my state, and I'm going to do it, and you know, do you think a bad outcome with that leads to, you know, lawmakers just being like, nope, we're going to ban this? Like, so honestly, like the knee jerk reaction to, you know, to venomous reptiles, where those institutions that might come along that have a positive reason for keeping a venomous collection really don't have that option anymore because it's been banned through their state, or you know, you just can't even keep those animals, or
when they change the laws in a state. I mean, sometimes, you know, legitimate institutions are grandfathered in, or you know, are given a special allowance, or, and you know, in my state you have to get a permit to keep and breed or keep venomous reptiles, and it's not easy to get. And you know, I don't think it should be like free for all, you know, just everybody keep a venomous snake if you want. Go to a reptile show, get a, you know, viper in a deli cup and bring it home and, you know, see how you do with it. I think there needs to be some structure, you know, some kind of structure in place to say, okay, let's make sure the people that are keeping them are doing so responsibly, you know, and to get the license or whatever in Utah, you have to have like a 3 barrier system where you have 3 locked doors between, you know, the outside and the reptile. So there's no, you know, if it gets out of its cage, it doesn't necessarily able to get out into the world. Like you know, the cobras in South Carolina and Texas. So, you know, I think that's appropriate. I don't think there's anything wrong with having some sort of rule system in place to say, hey, you know, let's do this responsibly. And if you can show that you're thinking about it and you're doing things properly, or maybe you have to have anti-venom on hand, or have a source of it that you have access to, and not just say, you know, the hospital will give it to me or the nearest zoo will give it to me. You know, you have some kind of B plan on that, especially if you have a big collection of hots. You know, there's it's like not if, but when somebody's going to get bit with a big collection. Even the best keepers in the world get bit, you know, once in their life, you know. So, you know, that's after, you know, thousands of hours of reptile handling, but still it's, you know, it'll happen. So you got to be prepared.
Yeah, and I mean, some of this venom's so rare and so hard to get that you know, it's you know, you're really risking your own life if you don't procure the right anti-venom for some of the animals that. And you know, I mean, man, there's some, you know, the Mang vipers are amazing looking. I mean, they're nuts. They're just insane. One of my favorite, but I don't think so, man. Not for me.
Big
you know,
snakes.
Like
you take a bite from one of those. I mean, I don't know how dangerous their venom is, but I mean, if you take any bite from a large venomous snake,
their heads look like they could put a lot of venom into you. Their glands look very, very big. You know, and so I wouldn't want to take a bite from something like that.
No. But you know, I'm fairly ignorant when it comes to venomous. I don't know a lot about venomous snakes or venomous snake keeping, and you know, I've you know, seen lots of rattlesnakes in my days, and then, you know, see them out around here, and you know, I keep my distance, or maybe take a picture or two, you know, and try to do so responsibly. But that's, you know, as far as I go. I kept a couple as a kid, but when I didn't realize it was illegal to do so, I had a couple rattlesnakes as pets, and we didn't have any incidences, but we came close to 1 or 2, and you know, that's kind of a scary thing to think about. But you know, there should be some kind of rules in place to kind of hopefully prevent some things that are happening from happening. And
well, it just seems like the stuff that's happening now is happening fast. Like, you know, the South Carolina legislation that happened really fast. Like, at least it seemed like it did to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
well, Nick was saying that they're not listening to USARK, or they're not listening to other people they're just trying to push something forward, you know? And I don't think that's that never works out either, because then it's not based on reality. It's based on their fears. And so, you know, it's not going to solve the problem. It's just going to make people upset because they're not able to do things even in a responsible manner,
Yeah.
and I just don't think that's the way to
Well,
go.
and I think you hit it on.
Unfortunately, politicians don't listen. Right?
Yeah, I think
For
you
the
hit
most
it.
part. Some do.
You hit it on the head when you said it's easier to just ban stuff than it is
Yeah.
to try to regulate it. And it's like, well, if we ban it, then it's just back end enforcement. Well, if we catch you with it, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
It's not legal to sell. It's not legal to own. But we're not going to have to spend any real resource around policing it. It's just when we find it on the back end, we punish it, right? And that's pretty much, I think, I think that's a very politician way to look at stuff, So
and then it kind of creates a nanny state, or people that are passionate about it are going to do it one way or another, and so they either leave the state or they do it under and
we have
keep it quiet or whatever. And then
we sure have an awfully strong gun lobby in this country, and no politician wants to come take people's guns away because of it. I mean, they'll talk about it. Yeah, they'll talk about it all day, and everybody's like, "Oh, the NRA is horrible," blah blah blah. I mean, to be honest, they've secured gun rights for Americans for a long time. So
I was saying, like, we have a school shooting once a week or something, but as soon as you try to take away guns, but we have one Cobra escape, and all of a sudden you're going to ban it within that state. It's
right.
pretty ridiculous,
So having those strong lobbies there for us to to back us up and fight for our rights. It's just, the amount of gun owners versus the amount of reptile owners in the United States are, apples and oranges in numbers. That's part of the problem.
We need to support those people that are kind of going to bat for us.
For sure.
Support USARC and make sure you're donating. And, I set up a monthly donation just to make it easy, and I don't think about it, and the money just goes to help. So hopefully that can continue, and they can continue to fight for our rights. So, well, that wasn't even our topic.
Lock up
today.
your Cobra. Yeah. Lock up your Cobras.
Yeah. Keep those Cobras in their cages, guys. Come on.
Yeah.
So today,
so what is our topic?
We're going to talk about feeding schedules. So there's, I think it's an important topic to discuss. A lot of unhealthy or overweight reptiles exist in our hobby, and so we're going to talk about regular versus irregular feeding schedules. So we'll try to maybe help define those, our ideas. Let's get started.
All right,
let's go with the coin toss here.
Coin toss.
You ready to call it?
So am I going?
You ready to get it wrong?
I'm just gonna. I'll just call it in the air, and then we'll figure out what pro or irregular or regular. All right. Ready?
Okay.
Go ahead. Throw it.
All right. What you got?
Heads.
His tails.
God
man,
damn
you
it,
are
dude.
really bad at this.
You know what? I don't know.
I'm gonna have to let you flip
the
coin. I
was going to say I don't know who you are anymore. I'm starting to question.
Funny.
Like
that's
statistically,
what are the odds, right?
Yeah, statistically speaking,
you won a couple, haven't you? You
won
won once. Oh
once.
Man, yeah, I can see why.
It might be two. It might be two.
I need to.
We're like 12 episodes deep right now. Like
I need to train the camera too, so you can see the coin and you can see that you got it wrong.
Yeah, because statistically speaking, this shouldn't happen. These are like the worst triple ball python combo ratios I'm going with right now. How much I lose. So,
well, as reptile keepers, we know that the odds don't always work out in our favor.
Apparently, you're using me to prove that rule.
I remember I bred like back in my ball python days. I bred a Mojave to a lesser, and I got 5 normals and 1 Mojave, like out of 6 eggs. It's like, you had as good a chance as getting a leucistic as you did as getting a normal. And this was back when leucistics were probably, $1,000, $1,000 each, It's like, that's figures. That's how the odds go. But apparently in flipping coins, like I just, I'm amazing at the odds.
Yeah. Yeah, I am.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not.
Well, I'm going to go with the irregular feeding schedule and kind of push that proponent. So
fine.
Sorry, man.
Fine.
You got to try to defend the regular weekly feeding schedule. Or
all right.
Whatever you want to call it.
I may not like it, but I will do it. I'll do
Okay.
it. All right.
So
All right. Well,
I'll
you
go.
know
I'll
what?
go
Since I
first.
get to
How
lose, you
about,
get to start. Yeah,
okay,
of
I'll
course
go
you are.
first.
Yeah.
uh, so I guess I would define an irregular feeding schedule. Maybe more appropriate term would be a natural feeding schedule. So based on their natural history, right? These animals have evolved to have a certain diet and timing of their diet, and prey availability, it varies throughout the year. And so why not follow that in herpetoculture? So why not keep our animals and feed them kind of on a schedule that they're used to from the wild? So I in the Green Tree Python book that Terry Phillip and I wrote, I included in there a bunch of details on some native species that occurred within the range of green tree pythons in Australia, and included like how big the weanlings were, when they were released from their parents or set off on their own, kind of thing. And, obviously snakes are going to feed on the dumbest, newest animals, and that they can overpower, and that are dumb enough to get caught or whatever. And
I'm
so,
sorry, the dumbest, newest
yeah,
animals. I just made me laugh. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah.
I'm sorry.
So obviously they're gonna be feeding mostly on those, and that kind of coincides with prey availability when the weanlings occur. And most animals don't breed constitutively throughout the year. They have defined breeding schedules and times when they have offspring. Pythons are a great example. They breed once a year. It's generally a lot of pythons will breed in the winter or spring, and then have their eggs a few months after that. And so they have their natural rhythms and their natural cycles, and their prey items do as well. So they're feeding more frequently on probably smaller weanling animals, depending on the species and what they catch. So it's a good idea to research the animals you keep, find out what some of their native prey items might be, and then see when those are produced, or when the animal when their wet season is, or whatever, when animals are breeding and thriving in their natural habitat. So that's how I would start this out. What do you got, man?
Okay. I think there's certainly a case to be made for, infrequent or kind of feeding irregularly. But I think when you're talking about baby snakes and breeding animals, that regular feedings actually, we're not out in nature. We leverage all of the positive things that we can do by garnering resource and concentrating it in captivity. So I think when you're raising babies, having a regular feeding schedule that helps them get up to size in a reasonable time, that doesn't make them fat and doesn't there's something to be said for that regularity. And I think one of the dangers of irregular feeding is that you're too irregular. And I think we've definitely seen that in the hobby, where we went from, oh, I feed my snake every week, no matter how big or how, old it is, to I feed my animal hardly ever. And I barely give it any food. And I don't think either one of those are good. So I think finding a schedule that is regular is a good thing. I think the way you feed hatchlings and juveniles is not the way you feed subadults, and certainly not the way you feed adults. So if you look at the growth curve and the energy needed or by hatchling animals versus adults, they take starkly different energy intakes to maintain themselves. So I think you're definitely kind of, and it kind of depends if you are keeping animals in gigantic zoo type display enclosures, and they're all over this cage and they're moving all around, and it really expending a lot of energy, then maybe you can afford to feed them a little bit more often. But I think the point that I would make is that regular feeding is to the benefit probably of the keeper in keeping a schedule, so that you're on a schedule, you're making sure that you're caring for the animal as far as its needs, and that the animal is getting, the nutrition that it needs regularly enough to grow at the rate that it should. And now what that frequency is probably what we could all argue about. When is too soon and how much is too much. But I think that regular feeding, there's nothing wrong with regular feeding. So I think that's probably where I'd go with that.
Yeah. And I agree that, it's hard to feed a juvenile, too frequently, but of course that depends on the species, but as far as, pythons go, where I have the most experience, they're going to grow long and thin rather than fat. They don't usually bulk up until they reach adult size. Now, another aspect or issue that's in herpetoculture, I think, is we often conflate, maximum size with adult size. And so we have that idea of like, oh, it needs to get, a coastal carpet needs to be 12 feet before it reaches, adult size. But no, they get adult size at like 5 feet, they're adult size then. And so I think that misconception is very common in herpetoculture. And so that needs to be addressed. So, but getting them to that adult size and then slowing down and maybe adopting a more natural schedule. Now, of course, a green tree python in the wild, as the papers have shown, feeds very infrequently. So if you follow a natural feed schedule, you also need to be prepared for a natural reproductive cycle and a natural other aspects of their keeping. Now, are they healthier? Yeah. And are they going to live longer? Yeah. Are they going to have less eggs? Yeah, probably so.
Yeah. But if they live longer, you're taking what you're probably doing is taking the same amount of eggs and stretching them out over a longer period of time, right?
Yeah.
You may be talking about the same number of offspring. You're just taking it out over a much longer period of time.
Yeah. And also the feeding, the way they feed or the amount they feed on or whatever also goes to, they have different mechanisms that decide whether or not their eggs are going to be larger or they're going to have more eggs per clutch. And so those kind of things, there's been some research done and a little bit of insight into that, but we're still learning a lot of things. So, maybe switching up your feeding cycle could result in maybe smaller clutches, but the eggs are larger and the babies are easier to get established or get going or whatever, so maybe there's trade-offs or benefits from that. So, if you can, I guess maybe, and along those same lines, you like maybe 1 year a green tree python feeds on just a few, a handful of meals in the whole year. Whereas another year, it might be a really good year and there's plenty of prey around and, they gorge themselves because, green tree pythons don't pass up a meal, which is, and I think, we need to pay attention to the behaviors of our snakes because some species are opportunistic. They come from a hard, area. And so they're going to eat whenever they have the chance because that's their programmed, that's programmed into them. That's their, evolutionary biology. But if, in the wild, the feeding opportunities only come by every once in a while. Yeah. So they need that response. Yeah. Whereas in captivity, if they're getting a meal a week, they're like, oh, more food. And then we have an unhealthy, fed snake. I really, part of this really came to light with a post from Matt Somerville where he posted his Ingram's brown snake, right? Did you see that post? It was a necropsy post and he had, had one of his snakes die and he'd only fed it once that year. And apparently it only eats, maybe a couple times a year, but even on that very, limited feeding schedule, the whole, abdomen of the snake was filled with fat deposits. So there are some species that are just exceedingly good at storing energy, right?
Yeah.
And snakes is in general are that way. You know, there's some species that probably eat quite a bit. You know, they might
Mm-hmm.
need to be fed every couple days, especially some that may be insectivorous, or eat other easily digestible, or they have a high metabolism, like various colubrids, coach whips and things like that are fast moving and eat probably as much as they can catch their prey. So like you said, it depends on the species. But that's all something that needs to be taken into consideration when you're deciding, what species you're going to keep, or deciding on a new species. You need to learn about their natural history. And so that's kind of, maybe we're hitting it from two different angles, but understanding their natural history is key to keeping them happy and healthy, and feeding them appropriately.
Yeah.
So with an Ingram's brown snake, you might only need to feed it a couple times a year. That might be, and that might be too much. Who knows? So, that it just depends on the species. Whereas like, I've got some shovel nose snakes, and I feed them several times a week, and they don't get fat. They're doing pretty well, and they probably eat quite a bit, because insects are a lot less, have a lot less energy to them, at least some insects, than like, say, a rodent. There's a lot of fat on a mammal versus an insect, which is a lot of chitin and stuff, like indigestible matter.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely, well, and I think that's one of the things we kind of, I don't want to say we gloss over, but I think it's easy to say like, oh, snakes eat rodents, and well, I mean, yeah, but is that what their natural diet is and what is the frequency they encounter, or whatever their natural diet is, and that will tell you a little bit about their intake. So if we give them a highly nutritious, but also maybe too nutritious of a food source, and they don't move around like they would in the wild, or maybe they just sit the same, but the food source has so much more fat content or nutrient content that so much more of it gets stored to fat because they're not burning it. It just goes to the detriment of the animal. So I mean, I think I used to think that letting your animal clean out, and when you're cooling them down, and that was strictly so your animal doesn't throw it up, and clean them out so that when they're reproducing, that they don't have to deal with food. And that was my old way of thinking. And my new way of thinking is that's just their off season. That's when everything's shut down. And I noted, and this was in the Tracy eye that I noticed, this is they're absolutely psychopaths when it comes to summer to fall months, and they'll take food just like, I mean, it's scary. They're scary.
Yeah.
And you can start introductions and start doing that, and they're just food in their head, and all of a sudden they make that flip, and then they completely are so much less interested in food. They go into their breeding mode, and they're just like clockwork. Once they lay their eggs, you give them a month or so, then you start introducing small food to them again, and they're right back on it. And it's just a nice cycle. And for me, I think I tend to feed a little bit heavier in the the late spring, summer to fall months, and kind of taper it off and let them do their thing, and then start it over again. So they have this, larger ebb and flow. But when I feed on a schedule, you know what I mean? It helps me, but there's still a cycle. So I think there's something definitely to, when we talk about infrequent feeding, I think, we have to talk about feeding on a cycle. I think that's a natural thing. I think that whether you're feeding heavily for a period of the year and then giving them an off, or feeding infrequently around the year, I don't think that either of those are wrong in the correct situation. I think that, younger animals, babies, can probably be fed less frequently year round. Whereas subadults and adults probably need to be fed, cyclically through the season, especially if you're breeding them. Maybe if you're not going to breed them or whatever, then maybe you can feed them infrequently. And I guess that's the other thing too, is if you're not trying to breed your snake, maybe you really don't need to, if you want, a snake that'll live 20, 25 years and you don't care about breeding them, then no, you probably don't need to give them the caloric intake that somebody who's trying to breed their animal does. Right. I mean,
sure.
That's kind of my thought.
Yeah. I also, when we're talking pythons, there's been some research that shows when a python digests a large meal, their organs increase in size to handle that additional, to increase the metabolism to digest that meal and store that, as fat or make energy out of it or whatever. And so, when you're, consider, if you're feeding a python a large meal once a week, their organs are getting bigger and then they're getting smaller and then they're getting bigger and they're getting smaller. That could take a toll on the animal, and really shorten its lifespan and cause, issues. So I would, definitely recommend keeping that in mind too, especially if you're keeping pythons. I was reading a paper, maybe it was a thesis, Gavin Bedford's thesis, and he had measured, the increase in metabolism using a certain biomarker. I can't remember off the top of my head, but and he found that when he was, and I think this was with water pythons or olive pythons. One of the,
I want to say that sounds right. That sounds
he
right.
He might have done it in a few species, but my take home from that, when I was reading, was that if he fed a meal that was less than 20% of the animal's weight, he didn't see that increase in metabolism like he did with the larger meals. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you might feed more frequently if you're feeding smaller meals. And I've heard many people have reported, that that's very successful in their breeding regimen when they do increased feedings, that they feed a lot of small meals rather than one large meal. And I don't know if there's a cumulative effect. Like if you're feeding 5, meals that are 20%, that's going to make for a larger food bolus. So I don't know how long you need to wait in between meals, or else you're going to ramp up the metabolism. So that may be a question that hasn't been answered at this point. But, the idea of feeding smaller meals may in the long run be more healthy for the animals because you're not ramping up their metabolism like a large meal does.
Well, I mean, so just me in my head thinking, and for me, the way I think about it is, these animals are able to take very large meals, right? That's part of their, that's part of their natural history, is to be able to take prey that are much larger than them and take it down and digest it. And so that physiology is there for a reason. And so, sure, use it for what it is, but take it for what it is. And so I have no issue feeding, if I'm going to ramp up an animal's metabolism like that, then maybe I'll capitalize on that and feed them several large meals spaced out over a period of time, and then let them go for a while. Let it everything calm down, but then take half the year off. I think that when the problem is people do maybe meals that borderline on ramping up their metabolism in that in that heavy, maybe extra difficult way for them, and they do it, feeding after feeding after feeding, thinking that that's kind of the normal size, or that what they're doing is just fine. And they're constantly like basically they're revving the metabolism of that animal over and over and over. Yeah. And that probably takes its toll. But if you rev that metabolism up and you rev it up for a period and then you just let it go, and they go right back. And
You mean like a natural cycle? Is that what you're talking about?
well, no,
Natural
I
feeding
mean,
cycle?
I think, I mean, listen, I think the best teacher of anything is nature.
Yeah,
And, you know, as I said from the jump, that, a seasonal cycle that's regularly fed is just fine.
yeah,
It's the infrequent feedings that I think are the issue, where, or maybe they're not. Maybe people. I mean, I think there's so many ways you can skin the cat with
sure.
feeding snakes and,
Yeah,
and reptiles. I mean, obviously, I think varanids and a lot of lizard species, they're really not forgiving in the way they need to be fed sometimes. And
mhm,
if you're not keeping them up, and you're not, I would say a varanid likes a ramped up immune system, and it likes to be fed. And as long as it's heated and fed, it does pretty well. I mean, you can obviously see people who take that way too far, and you can see morbidly obese, varanids
sure.
too. So, I mean, I think,
But generally, those are not kept appropriately. If you keep a monitor appropriately, you can give it a basking spot, 150 degrees that it needs to, keep that high. They're kind of like a high octane species, and they need
yeah,
constant
yeah.
fuel and constant heat. But in the wild, a lot of these come from maybe areas where it does cool down, like a Parenti in Central Australia is gonna get lower temperatures in the winter, and they're going to slow down and hang out in a
Hmm.
cave where it's more thermally stable, and wait until it heats up, and they can go out and get more food. Now maybe they come out later in the day, and in the heat of the day it gets warm enough that they can go eat and properly digest. But I think a lot of reptiles are definitely programmed to know, when things are changing, you don't want to tempt fate and start taking down a big meal if it's might get cold. But
Yeah.
that so there's a lot of things that go into that. But yeah, that's true. There's some that need that constant input, and I think that's what I was mentioning with the
And I mean,
colubrid snakes that eat
what's cold to
insects.
you? What's cold to you?
Yeah, yeah.
Because
I mean
I
that's and I'm just saying cold that shuts down their metabolism a little bit
yeah,
and has them
yeah,
slow down.
yeah,
So and I think that differs for different species. Like, I mean, we were out cruising in northern Queensland, around Cairns area, and we were looking for jungle carpet pythons, and it was rainy, and it was in the low 70s or high 60s, and I think it was probably 10 minutes after I said we're not going to find any carpet pythons in this weather, there was a jungle carpet crawling across the road, and he was highly active and very feisty. I was
yeah.
like, okay, so yeah, maybe my idea of what they need or what kind of temperatures are good for them is off base.
Hmm.
Maybe they do better at 70s, or at sometimes,
Right.
but they need that range of choices. I don't know if he was out hunting or if he was just trying to get back to his shelter site or what. I couldn't ask him. He wasn't very responsive to my questions, so it's hard to say what he was out there doing. Maybe looking for a mate, or you never know what gets a snake out and moving sometimes. But the uh, he could have been hunting. Who knows? I don't know. It's hard to say. But
Despite your best
um,
line of questioning, it
yeah,
still
he
remains a
just
mystery.
his answer was just a hiss every time and
Yeah,
a strike. I was
yeah,
like, okay, all right, if that's the way
yeah.
you want to play it, I'll just take pictures and let you on your way.
There you
And
go.
it'd be fun to just follow that thing around. But
Sure.
with pythons, they're also built for a sedentary lifestyle. They're
Yeah.
a sit and wait predator. I would almost venture to wager, if you found a python in a tree hollow or something, and you didn't disturb it, but you stuck a pre-killed prey item in there for it to eat, it would probably stay in the same place for the whole year, unless it
Sure.
had, and you stuck the opposite gender in there for it to to make babies with, and you brought it food, and you brought it a mate, and if it didn't have to go out, it probably wouldn't. They're built to sit around, and they're
Yeah.
highly efficient, so they only need a couple prey items a year. I think that was another part of Gavin Bedford's research, and hopefully I'm not quoting this wrong, and he can correct me if I'm wrong. But he showed that with like Stimson's pythons, they needed like maybe 20 mice a year to just perform, the basic functions of a Stimson's python. So, I mean, that's what, 20 a year. That's one every other week at the most, just to, so, they don't require a lot of food and I'm not sure how he calculated that or what went into that. I can't recall the details of it, but that's kind of what stuck in my mind is, if we're feeding once a week, we're probably feeding a python too much. That's kind of my take on the message. But yeah, maybe if you're feeding a fuzzy mouse once a week, I think he calculated based on a certain weight of mouse. Maybe it was like a 15 to 20 gram mouse or something. So if you're feeding a 5-gram mouse to an adult, they probably will like go, "What are you doing?" But the whole thing will just fit in their mouth. But
the first year babies of Tracy, they're going on 3 years old right now, and they don't. I'm kind of like, man, am I not feeding right? Like they just don't. They're really lean. They're long, but they don't look like 3-year-old. What most people, I'll say that what most people would consider a 3-year-old scrub python to look like. So,
how many 3-year-old scrub pythons has anyone seen in the wild?
Well, and that's
like, that's the thing.
And that's to my point is, I think we kill it all with kindness and anthropomorphism and they're and I mean, to be honest, I get the idea of more feeding to get animals size and in a breeding regime there's probably, I mean, I think there's Shine's research will back up that in an area of plentiful prey resource, those animals are highly reproductive. And a lot of babies can be produced there because there's a lot of resource there, and where there's not a lot of resource, less babies get produced because it's just a cause and effect of the predator predation, plentifulness. So
I think they term that the golden spoon hypothesis. When you're born under a good year, these water pythons were hatching in a good year and got plenty of prey, and they went on to have more frequent reproductive activities and larger clutches and more, offspring overall. So of course, they want that. And again, that, maybe is particular to their early life rather than when they're adults. So, those kind of things have to be taken in context as well.
And I think, in that research, I don't know if he was looking at longevity of adults and things like that. I mean, I think that when you eat a high intake of prey, you can suffer from the natural health effects of eating a lot. And I think when you look at captive breeding, you can kind of leverage the ideas that Shine proved out to help you breed more animals. Maybe those animals don't live as long because they're being revved up younger and they're like what we were talking about earlier is, fed more frequently, more larger prey items. Maybe they live less, but they produce more eggs in that period. Whereas, an animal that was fed less will live longer and produce the same amount in a much longer period. So it's kind of, to be honest, I don't know that there's a right answer to the way you should feed your python or your reptile. But I think it definitely has to do with the goals. And I think that's kind of, if you want, an animal for 20 years and it's your pet, and then, you don't need to feed as much and smaller prey items less often. But if you're a breeder and that's what you need to do, then maybe, having a bit more of an energy intensive, food regime that's regularly, given, is appropriate.
Okay.
I stuck my thing in there, right?
Regular. No, I think, I was listening to Nick Mutton on Eric and Owen's podcast, or on Morelia Pythons Radio.
The most recent NPR?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yep.
And he was saying that yeah, you can feed them more often, they're just going to poop it out. So you're basically, wasting your money by feeding them large meals that they're not going to metabolize appropriately. Now, I've read some papers where I'm pretty sure they're pretty highly efficient even with larger prey items, and they are able to metabolize. But I do think there is a trade-off between size and how much energy they're getting it out and how much waste they're producing from that food item. But I'd have to refresh my memory on that research. But there's some papers that have been published that show, with different sizes and different frequencies, how efficient they were and how much energy they got out of those meals. So that's that's also very interesting and applicable research to this discussion. But if let's see, what was my other line of thought in that regard? If you're with kind of going back to the maximum size and adult size, differentiation. That was another thing Nick hit on as well, is like we think they need to be this huge animal. And
Yeah.
Oftentimes those larger animals that are overfed and have huge fat reserves or whatever, they're not the best breeders either. Your lean, 3-year-old, Tracy is going to be a much better breeder than some, giant 12-foot Tracy. He was saying, how many 16, 20-foot scrubs do you see on eggs? None.
Right.
Right. I wouldn't say it's impossible.
I don't know that I would say that. But
it depends.
They might be 20 years old though.
Sure.
I think there's
like, depending on the species, like if there's male combat, the males are going to try to be big. Right.
Yeah,
they're going to try to be the tough guy, and they're going to try to pass on their genes. So, it's not always an absolute, like a smaller male is going to be a better breeder, because maybe, but you might need to combat them, or, have them expend some of that energy that they're building up and use that size to show they're the boss, to kind of stimulate that breeding. So again,
I think scrubs is a good example of a species where males are big boys.
Oh yeah.
So
they can kill each other. You got to be really careful if you're combating throwing a shed skin from another male and watch them lose their mind and pace the cage and freak out, wrestle the shed or something.
Safer ways.
Exactly. But we need to keep those natural history elements in mind. And I think that's what it all boils down to. Mm-hmm. If you're paying attention to the natural history of the animal you're keeping, you're going to probably fare a little better. Now, are there tweaks to that? Of course. I really like that quote from Terry Phillips, where he's like, yeah, we have prairie rattles around here and it snows, but I'm not shoveling snow into my prairie rattler cage, that's just makes sense. And so we need to find the important, minimally needed, things that will result in success. And I think a lot of times in herpetoculture, we get to a point where we're like, okay, this is what it is. I just have to do this, or I just have to follow this schedule, or I just have to feed it, 20 mice a year and I'm good. Mm-hmm. That might not apply in every situation. You might have, it might be warmer where you're from, or it might be colder where you're from. And if you're feeding 20, that's too much, or it's too little. It all depends on you. And so that's the key, is we need to be observant. I love Eric's, where he's calling it student of the serpent. I don't think he coined that. I can't remember who. Maybe that was the boa guy. What's his name? I'm terrible. I can't remember names to save my lives. But anyway, the student of the serpent, watching what your snake does, watching kind of the success or output or whatever, and taking that into account and building that knowledge and your success over time. And I think a lot of times people want that boiled down and handed to them in a nice little package. How do I be successful with this animal? Well,
care sheets. They want the care sheet.
Exactly. They want the care sheet option. And
give me the cliff notes.
I think everybody's been guilty of that, because that's a good place to jump off.
Sure.
That's a good place to start. But that's not a good place to end.
When you don't know.
Regardless of the outcome, you're going to follow that care sheet no matter what, because so-and-so was successful with it,
Well, and I kind of feel like that's kind of the appeal of field herping, I think, is a lot as people go out and they say, man, I can observe, these animals in the wild, what they're doing. You kind of figure out quickly that all of the great things we glean is from natural history, and nature is the teacher. So, going out and field herping gives you the opportunity to, you can watch what it does in a cage, but if you watch what it does in nature, that will far informs more than what it's doing in the cage, I think.
Oh yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, like you said, if you went into, find a wild Tracier, you're going to see something that's probably lean and thin and smaller. If you could,
yep.
I love the example that Daniel Natouche gave. Like, he was at that arboreal symposium that they put on back a while back. I think it was the only one they did. But yeah. And he gave a talk.
And, I wish they
I didn't make it to that one. Ben Morrill was there, so we got to
lucky Ben.
Yeah, I didn't make it out to that one. It was on the East Coast, but anyway, he was giving a talk about wild green tree pythons, and he said that he's seen like 3 out of 1,000 that were over 1,000 grams.
Yeah,
and now the recommendation, the care sheet said, your female needs to be over 1,000 grams before she reproduces. And then you're getting like 30 eggs and 20 slugs from this giant 6-foot female or whatever that's over 1,000 grams, and or 2,000 or 3,000 grams, however big they used to get them, or still get them, I guess, in a lot of cases.
I think the trend is moving towards more reasonably sized animals.
Yeah, but, and the majority of green tree pythons in the wild are around the 600 gram mark. They're not huge animals. They're a small species of python.
Yeah,
now,
for sure.
Do they reproduce regularly in the wild? Probably not. If your main goal is to reproduce an animal, you might want them a little bit bigger. I don't know. I don't know how that plays out with success, but there are a lot of females that die in captivity pretty regularly because people overfeed them, I think. And they have other issues like, prolapses or tail hanging because it's full of crap, they're just too much energy that they can't really handle it or something. And they're maybe dehydrated on top of that because they're kept too warm, and there's all sorts of things that go into that. So, it's hard to say this is exactly what's causing it, but we know what's contributing to it. So, and overfeeding is terrible.
It's really interesting when you stop overfeeding those things and you stop overheating those things and you just keep them, perched very simply. They're so easy. They're just freaking super hands off. Like, just, don't open the cage in the middle of the night and get your face bit off. And that's really the biggest thing you have to worry about. I mean, they're super easy. And I just think that, we can be our own worst enemy sometimes. And conventional wisdom being the root of all evil, we're learning and growing, all of us together. So, nobody's fault. And somebody got an animal to 1,000 grams and they bred it and they said, well, that's what it is.
That's what it needed. It didn't breed till it was 1,000 grams.
Yeah, that's it. So,
not taking into account that it, was not being kept the way it wanted to be, or it was imported. So it was stressed, and it took several years to breed until it settled down. There's so many things that go into that, and it's hard to fault the people who that information on wild green tree pythons wasn't out there. And that was kind of one of the reasons I wanted to write that book, was because that information wasn't out there, and there was a lot of misconceptions about what a green tree python is.
And there was information out there, and even green tree people at the time were like, this book isn't the best book on what we know now. Maybe this information is dated and we need to update it. And I think that, that we can look back on older books and cringe a little and say like for the time, that was the best information that we knew. But that's why you buy the new edition, right? That's why you're updating the Carpet Python book. Like things come to light, man. You know what I'm saying? So,
well, and I frankly, when we were
I think we learn.
Right in the second edition of the Carpet book that you mentioned, we I realized we hadn't really talked about that idea of maximum versus adult size. And, so I went back through some of the papers and I realized there was some really good research and papers that we'd quoted in the first book, but we hadn't made the point of the average size of all the adults that were collected is this, so that's in the new edition. So hopefully there's more information and helpful information, and kind of in that context of some of the misconceptions, everybody says, oh, coastal carpets are 14 feet long. Well, yeah, one might have gotten that big, or a couple. I've seen some of my buddies out on the east coast of Australia have found some pretty freaking huge coastal carpets. Are they the key reproductive animals in their population? Probably not. Maybe they're the top male. Maybe they're the that big huge guy that's getting all the ladies.
Maybe they're 25 years old,
or maybe they're 80 and they're retired and they're just hanging out in the rafters of a barn and whiling out their days. Who knows? Yeah. So maybe they're addicted to brush-tailed possums and they got to go catch more brush-tailed possum. They're just they're so tasty. I just love the taste of a brush-tailed possum. And they were showing the introduced animals like the brush-tailed possum. Speaking of those, in Darwin area, they were kind of becoming an invasive species in that area, and the Darwin carpets were getting big. There were some huge male Darwin carpets, and Darwin carpets, have that male combat. They like to fight each other, and so that's maybe they're taking advantage of those new species and getting bigger and bulkier and heavier and tougher or whatever. So,
and I think a good way to keep at least a lot of my pythons lean is to feed them smaller meals, so they tend to grow longer and stay smaller. But when you start upping that food size and you're increasing the size of that food, the diameter of that food, that to me, that's when I see that animal really start to girth out and get larger. So I think they're in kind of just a natural response to the type of food they're intaking, you'll see how their body reacts to that. And when they start taking big meals, that's when you see them girth up, but if you keep them on smaller meals more often, at least the scrubs that I've seen, they tend to just grow much longer and stay much leaner. Now, I'm sure you could take that to the max and really just, pump them full of smaller meals and, all the time. And they'll start to get, fat over that. But, it's really, and I see it in younger animals when I'm transitioning to rats or something that's a little bit bigger. That's when I really notice them start to change from, a skinny, lean animal to a little girthier of an animal. And that was back when I used to probably feed a little heavier, and maybe that's completely anecdotal and all bullshit, but that's what I kind of noticed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And,
and you've adjusted your feeding, regimen accordingly,
Absolutely.
And I think, baby, a nursing rat fuzzy is going to be higher in fat content than a weanling mouse at the same size.
Yeah.
That weanling mouse is going to have, they're starting to eat solid food on their own. They're not nursing from their mother. They're a little leaner and scraggy. They're trying to make their own way and they're a little scragglier. They're going to be leaner and less, the animals are going to put on less fat because of that. So I think it depends on, what you're feeding as well, what species. And I think that, some of the reptiles, like their size maybe dictates what they're getting fed to some extent. Like say like a large python, if you're feeding it jumbo rats. What are jumbo rats? They're like retired breeders. They're old and fat. All my retired breeder rats are fat. That's why I usually get rid of them, is when I see them start, they like, is that pregnant? Nope, it's just fat. Okay, you're out of here. You're done. Yeah. And but then I go feed it to my snake. So they're getting an extra dose of that old fat rat. And so, the animals that are of a larger size may be more prone to obesity in captivity because they're getting those older, fatter, retired breeders.
And maybe
we should be feeding something else. Maybe
maybe you feed that old, fat, retired rat and you don't feed that much. You feed very, very infrequently. So,
Yeah.
you have to change. You
It
have to
gets two of
change
those a year or something. Yeah,
Yeah,
depending on
exactly.
how it behaves. Yeah,
Yeah.
so paying attention, being a student of the serpent, keeping an eye on your animals, no matter, if Chuck tells you to feed it every week, don't listen to that
Don't listen to
necessarily,
Chuck. Don't. Don't.
He's way off his rocker in that.
Make your
Yeah,
own
look at
decisions.
the natural history. Give them an infrequent or an irregular feeding regimen, and I think they'll be be better off. But pay attention to what the snake's doing.
At the same time, if Justin tells you that infrequent feeding is clearly the way to go with your baby snake, don't listen to him either, because he may not know what the freaking heck he's talking about.
So,
well, I don't know. I pretty much
you know,
exhausted what I have to say about this.
I think that's a good discussion on the topic. I think we brought up,
Yeah.
some reasonable things to think about, and again, just pay attention to your snake.
Yeah.
And don't just assume everything off the bat or off the first year because you read a good care sheet or a book. Even the complete carpet python, that might not be all you need to do is just read that. You might need to go do your own research or go find them in Australia or do whatever. There's a lot of things to learn.
I'm sure Nick and Justin would say that's one of the things you need to do, but probably not the only thing. Yeah, probably not the only thing.
But that's that was a good discussion. I think,
not bad.
We covered some good ground. But yeah.
I don't know if that was a mild disagreement club or a reptile fight club discussion. I'm not sure, but good discussion nonetheless.
Yeah, I got a little angry there.
Yeah,
no, not really. Yeah. Cool, man. Well,
yeah,
we appreciate you guys listening, and thanks for supporting us. And if you've got something to fight about or you want to fight somebody, let us know. We're welcome to. We want to have some other opinions and input on this show. So hit us up if you want to fight. Let us know. So thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week for another Reptile Fight Club.
Later, everybody.
Fight Club.